are men who build empires with their bare hands, and there are men who are never truly seen by the people those empires were built for. Benjamin Adeyemi was both of those men at the same time, and it took lying perfectly still in a hospital bed, pretending to be dead, to finally understand which one mattered more. Before we begin, welcome to Bishop Tales, where we bring you powerful, emotional, and life-changing stories every week. If this is your first time here, please subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story. Drop a comment and tell us where you are watching from tonight. Are you in Nigeria, Ghana, the United Kingdom, the United States, Canada, South Africa, or somewhere else in the world? We love knowing where our family is. Now sit back, because this story is going to stay with you for a very long time. Benjamin was 71 years old. He was tall even now, with the kind of posture that comes not from pride but from decades of carrying responsibility. His hair had gone fully white sometime in his early 60s, and the lines on his face were deep and earned, carved there by 50 years of early mornings and late nights and decisions that kept thousands of people employed. He owned manufacturing plants in 4 cities. He owned cargo vessels that moved goods across international waters. He owned office buildings and warehouses and agricultural land and a portfolio of investments so complex that even his accountant sometimes needed a moment to remember all of it. People who knew him in the business world called him the General, not because he had ever served in any military, but because of the way he commanded a room, a boardroom, a negotiation table, a crisis. He had that quality that some men are born with and others spend their whole lives trying to manufacture. Presence. Quiet, unshakable, undeniable presence. But at home, in the enormous house he had built on the edge of the city with views of the hills in the distance, Benjamin Adeyemi was just a tired old man who ate his dinner alone most evenings and wondered, in the silence between one breath and the next, whether any of the people who shared his roof actually saw him when they looked at him, or whether they only ever saw the money behind his name. It had started as a quiet feeling, the kind that arrives slowly and settles in your chest without announcing itself. He first noticed it seriously about 2 years before everything happened. He had come home from a trip abroad, a week of difficult meetings that had drained him more than he wanted to admit, and not one person in his house had asked how he was. His second wife, Vivian, had greeted him at the door with a list of renovation requests for the east wing of the house. His eldest son, Marcus, had appeared in the hallway long enough to ask whether he had brought back the documents for a property transfer Marcus wanted approved. His second son, Raymond, had not appeared at all. He had sent a text message that said simply, "Welcome back." His daughter from his second marriage, Serena, had kissed him on the cheek and gone straight back to whatever she was doing on her phone. Only his youngest, his daughter Amara, the child of his first wife who had passed away many years ago, had come and sat with him in his study that evening and asked him, with genuine curiosity and genuine patience, how the trip had really been. He had looked at her across the desk and felt something loosen in his chest that he had not realized was held so tightly. That was the evening the question first formed itself clearly in his mind. If I were not wealthy, would any of them still be here? He did not ask the question out loud. He was not the kind of man who said everything he thought. He had built his success partly on knowing when to speak and when to observe. So he observed. Over the months that followed he paid close attention, the way he had learned to pay attention to markets and movements and the small signals that come before large shifts. He watched Marcus, who was 40 years old and had the manner of a man perpetually waiting to inherit something. Marcus checked on his father's health with a regularity that might have looked like love but felt, under Benjamin's careful observation, more like monitoring. He came by the office occasionally, always with a proposal, always with something that required money or a signature or an introduction to someone Benjamin knew. He spoke to his father with the particular combination of charm and impatience that belongs to people who have never had to wait for anything they truly wanted. Raymond was 37 and quieter than his brother, which some people mistook for depth. But Benjamin had learned, in the way that fathers learn things they wish they did not know, that Raymond's quiet was not the quiet of reflection. It was the quiet of strategy. Raymond kept a notebook that he carried everywhere and wrote in at odd moments, and Benjamin had seen enough of the world to recognize the behavior of a man who was always calculating, always measuring, always looking at the people around him and asking not who they are but what they are worth. Raymond smiled frequently and warmly, but his eyes, when he thought no one was watching them, were cold and careful as a lawyer's. Serena was 29 and beautiful in the way that women are beautiful when they know exactly how their beauty works and have decided to make it their primary occupation. She spent her days building an audience on social media, posting photographs of herself in expensive clothes in expensive places, most of which her father paid for without being asked because the bill simply arrived on his accounts. She was not deliberately unkind. She was something more quietly painful than that. She was indifferent. She treated her father's house the way guests treat a very good hotel. With comfort and without investment. She called him when she needed something and otherwise operated as though he existed in a separate universe that occasionally intersected with hers when it was convenient. And then there was Vivian. His wife of 16 years. She had been beautiful when he married her and she was beautiful still, with the maintained and deliberate beauty of a woman who understands that appearance is a kind of currency. She was sophisticated and well-dressed and knew exactly what to say at dinner parties and charity functions. She ran his household with efficiency. But she had not asked him a personal question, something real, something that required an honest answer, in longer than Benjamin could clearly remember. She slept beside him and sat across from him at breakfast and stood next to him at events and was never truly with him, not in the way that Sarah had been with him, his first wife, Amara's mother, who had known him when he had nothing and had loved him with the uncalculating love of someone who has chosen a person rather than a position. Before we continue, like the video, subscribe to Bishop Tales, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Now let's see what happened next. Sarah had died 14 years ago. He still kept a photograph of her in his desk drawer. He looked at it on the evenings when the house felt most like a beautiful cage. It was on one of those evenings, sitting alone in his study with the city lights visible through the tall windows, the photograph of Sarah in his hand and the question settled heavily in his chest, that Benjamin Adeyemi decided he needed to know the truth. Not the comfortable truth that people perform for the camera. The real truth. The truth that comes out when people believe no one is watching. The truth that lives in behavior, not in words. He thought about it for 3 days. He turned the idea over in his mind the way he turned over major business decisions, examining it from every angle, looking for the flaws, testing it against his understanding of the people involved. It was extreme. He knew that. It was the kind of thing that, if anyone had suggested it to him in the abstract, he would have called unnecessary, even dramatic. But he had spent 2 years watching his family from the inside, and he had reached the point that men reach when the uncertainty becomes more painful than the truth could ever be. He needed to know. Whatever it cost him to know it, he needed to know. He picked up his private telephone, the one whose number only 4 people in the world possessed, and he called Dr. Samuel Obi. Dr. Samuel Obi had been Benjamin's personal physician for 26 years. He was a small man with careful hands and a way of listening that made you feel, when you were with him, that you were the only person in the world whose words mattered at that particular moment. He had seen Benjamin through 2 surgeries, a bout of pneumonia that had frightened them both, the quiet grief of Sarah's death and its long aftermath. He answered on the first ring. Benjamin told him he needed to meet. Tonight, if possible. Come to the back entrance of the house, he said. Come before anyone is awake. Dr. Obi arrived at 5:30 in the morning with his medical bag over his shoulder and his expression already composed into the particular attentiveness he reserved for serious conversations. Benjamin made them both coffee and then laid out his plan with the same directness he brought to business. He wanted to fake his death. He wanted Dr. Obi to help him appear deceased using medication that would suppress his vital signs to near imperceptibility while leaving his mind completely awake. He wanted to be taken to the hospital where Dr. Obi would examine him in front of the family and announce that he had passed away from organ failure. And then he wanted to lie still and listen. Dr. Obi did not speak for a long moment after Benjamin finished. He looked at his old friend across the table, at the steadiness in Benjamin's eyes and the particular quality of pain that was visible there if you knew where to look, which Dr. Obi did. Then he said, Benjamin, I will help you. But you must understand something before we proceed. People who are in pain sometimes say and do things in the immediate aftermath of shock that do not represent the fullness of who they are. You must be prepared that what you hear may be worse than you fear. And you must also be prepared that it may be more complicated than a simple verdict of love or no love. Benjamin nodded. He said he understood. He said he needed to know anyway. That same morning, before the house came to life, Benjamin also called his lawyer, Mr. Adewale Coker. Mr. Coker was a precise man who had managed Benjamin's legal affairs for 20 years and had the kind of loyalty that comes from long association and genuine respect. Benjamin told him what he was planning. Mr. Coker listened without interruption. Then he said that he would move the majority of the estate into protected accounts immediately, so that if anyone attempted to access funds while Benjamin was believed to be deceased, they would find very little of what they were expecting. He would also prepare a revised will and have it sealed and ready. Benjamin told him to make the changes he had been contemplating for some time. Mr. Coker said he would have everything in order within 48 hours. Over the 4 days that followed, Benjamin watched his family with the eyes of a man who already knows what he is about to lose but has not yet lost it. He sat at breakfast and looked at each of their faces. He ate dinner across from them and listened to the conversations that moved across the surface of things without ever going anywhere real. He noticed what he had always known but had perhaps been too busy, or too hopeful, to fully confront. That Marcus talked about the business constantly but never about his father. That Raymond listened and noted and calculated and revealed nothing. That Serena was present only in the way a beautiful picture is present, occupying space without offering warmth. That Vivian was efficient and composed and absent in every way that counted. And he noticed, as he always noticed, Amara. She was the one who sat beside him after dinner without being asked. She was the one who brought his reading glasses from the other room without him having to stand up. She was the one who asked him, with real curiosity, what he had been thinking about that afternoon, and then listened to the answer with the patience of someone who genuinely wanted to know. She was 26 years old and she had her mother's eyes, Sarah's eyes, warm and attentive and capable of seeing through the surfaces of things to whatever was real underneath. She did not know that her father was watching her with the particular tenderness of a man who is about to cause her tremendous pain because he loves her and cannot think of any other way to find out what he needs to know. On the 4th evening, the family gathered for dinner as they usually did, in the formal dining room with its long table and its chandelier and its careful arrangement of expensive things. Benjamin looked around the table and felt, with quiet certainty, that this was the last dinner he would ever have with them as the man they had always known him to be. After tonight everything would shift. He did not know yet how much. Raymond looked at him across the table and asked if something was wrong. Benjamin said no. He said he was just thinking about family, about what really matters in the end. Vivian barely looked up from the message she was reading on her phone. Marcus checked his watch and said something about not wanting the food to get cold. Serena laughed at something on her screen. Only Amara put everything down and looked at her father with careful eyes and asked whether he was feeling well. He told her he was fine. It was, of all the things he said that evening, the one that cost him the most to say. After dinner, Benjamin went to his bedroom and closed the door. Dr. Obi was already there, having entered through the rear of the house as they had arranged. He opened his medical bag on the bedside table and spoke quietly. He explained again what the medication would do. It would slow Benjamin's heartbeat and breathing to the point of near invisibility. He would appear, to any standard examination, to be deceased. He would not be able to move or speak or open his eyes. But his mind would remain entirely clear. He would hear everything. Benjamin said he understood. He lay down on his bed. He looked at the ceiling for a moment, and then he looked at Dr. Obi and said, "Thank you for being a real friend, Samuel. A man in my position does not have many of those." Dr. Obi told him to rest. He told him that when he woke, he would know the truth, and that whatever the truth was, they would face it together. He administered the medication slowly and carefully. Benjamin felt the heaviness descend through him like water rising in a vessel, filling him from the feet upward, taking his hands and his legs and his chest and finally the muscles of his face, until he lay perfectly still and perfectly aware, a conscious mind in a body that would not respond to any of his instructions. 10 minutes later he heard his own body slide from the bed to the floor. The sound brought footsteps. Running, urgent, the kind of footsteps that come from fear. His bedroom door opened. He heard Amara's voice first, high and cracked with panic, calling his name the way she had called it as a small child when she was frightened. "Daddy," she cried. "Daddy, please." More footsteps arrived. Vivian's voice asking what had happened. Marcus asking if he was breathing. Raymond pushing forward and pressing fingers to Benjamin's throat, searching for a pulse that the medication had made all but impossible to find. Serena's voice somewhere near the doorway, high-pitched and alarmed in the way of someone who has just been confronted with something real for the first time in a long while. There was chaos in the room for several minutes. Then the sirens came, and Benjamin felt himself lifted, the stretcher beneath him, the movement through the house, the cold air of the night on his still face as they wheeled him to the ambulance. He heard Amara say she was riding with him. He heard Vivian say the others would follow in the car. He felt the ambulance doors close and the vehicle begin to move, and through all of it, through the crackling of the radio and the sound of machines and the paramedics talking over him in quick urgent shorthand, he heard Amara's voice beside him, very close, very steady in the way that people are steady when they are terrified and pushing through it for someone they love. She held his hand. He felt the warmth of it. She told him she was there. She told him not to leave. She told him she was not ready, that she needed more time, that there were so many things she had not yet said to him. Her tears fell on the back of his hand and he could not move his fingers to close around hers, and that was, of all the things that happened to Benjamin Adeyemi in those hours, the moment that came closest to breaking him. At the hospital Dr. Obi was waiting. He examined Benjamin in the presence of the family, his face arranged in the careful gravity of a physician delivering terrible news. He checked the vital signs that told him everything he needed to know about his friend's condition and told the family only that Benjamin was gone. Total organ failure. His heart had stopped. There was nothing more that could be done. He was so sorry. Amara's cry was the kind of sound that does not leave a room easily. It was raw and total and came from a place far below performance. She collapsed into the chair beside the bed and shook with it, her hands pressed over her mouth, her whole body reduced by grief to something small and barely held together. And then Benjamin heard what he had come to hear. Marcus's phone rang. Marcus stepped out into the hospital corridor to answer it. He did not close the door fully. His voice carried easily into the room where his father lay, into the ears of a man who was listening to every word with a clarity that no amount of sedation could have dimmed. "It's done," Marcus said into the phone. His voice was low but it was not quiet enough. It was the voice of a man who believes he is speaking in private and does not feel the particular caution that grief imposes on people who are actually experiencing it. "Yes, I'm telling you, it is finally done. The old man is gone. The doctor confirmed it an hour ago." There was a pause while someone on the other end of the call spoke. Then Marcus laughed. It was a sound Benjamin recognized but had never heard at such close range. The private laugh, the unguarded one, the one that comes out when a man believes no one who matters is listening. "Exactly," Marcus said. "Exactly. Now we can finally move. Get the advisors ready. I want to be in the office by tomorrow afternoon." Inside the room Amara still wept quietly at the bedside. Vivian stood near the window with her arms folded, her face composed, looking at the city through the glass as though she were waiting for something to begin. Raymond had his notebook out. Benjamin could hear the quiet scratch of his pen on the paper, steady and unhurried, the sound of a man doing his accounting. Serena sat in the corner and typed on her phone. When Amara looked up through her tears and asked what she was doing, Serena said she was letting people know. When Amara said it could wait, that they should just be there together, just for a few minutes, Serena said, with the particular flatness of someone who has decided that visible emotion is a kind of weakness, that sitting in a hospital room staring at a body was not going to change anything. She was not wrong, technically. She was simply not a person who understood that some things are done not because they change outcomes but because they are the human thing to do. Marcus came back into the room wearing his grief like a jacket he had put on quickly and hoped no one would look at too carefully. He sat on the edge of the chair across from Amara and said something about how their father had lived a full life. Amara looked at him. She had heard the phone call. Not all of it, but enough. She looked at her brother with the eyes of someone who has just been shown something they cannot unsee, and she said nothing, because she was still too deep inside her own grief to find words for what she was feeling about anyone else. It was Raymond who suggested they go home. The hospital would handle everything, he said. There was nothing more they could do here tonight. Vivian agreed. She said tomorrow would be a demanding day and they all needed to rest. She said she would call the relevant people in the morning, the right contacts, the right journalists, the right associates, to manage the announcement properly. Marcus said that was sensible. Serena was already gathering her things. Amara looked at her father's still face for a long moment. She touched his hand one more time, very gently, the way you touch something you are about to leave and are not sure you will ever get back. Then she straightened and walked out of the room without looking at any of them. Dr. Obi waited until the family had left the corridor entirely before he came back into the room and closed the door. He sat down in the chair beside the bed and spoke quietly to the man who could hear him but could not answer. He told him he was sorry. He told him he was staying for the night. He told him he was not going to leave him alone in this room, not even now, not even when there was no one else who would know the difference. He pulled his chair a little closer and opened the medical journal he had brought and read quietly in the dim light while the machines around him beeped their steady, manufactured rhythm. Meanwhile in the Adeyemi mansion, which the family had now arrived home to, a different kind of evening was unfolding. Vivian walked through the front door and asked someone to turn on the lights. She could not stand all the candles the household staff had lit in the windows as a mark of respect. "Too much atmosphere," she said. "Too depressing." The lights came on, bright and ordinary, and the house felt again like a house rather than a place of mourning, which was evidently how Vivian preferred it. She settled herself on the long white sofa in the sitting room and announced that she was exhausted and that someone should bring her something to drink. Raymond went to the cabinet in the corner and returned with a bottle of very good wine and several glasses. Amara stood in the doorway and watched them. She watched her stepmother accept a glass of wine and lean back against the cushions with a sigh of relief. She watched Marcus loosen his tie and drop into her father's armchair, her father's specific chair, the one no one else had ever sat in while her father was alive, as though he had been waiting his whole life for that particular seat to become available. She watched Raymond pour the wine and distribute the glasses with the calm efficiency of a man at a business function. She watched Serena kick off her shoes and stretch her feet along the sofa cushions and reach immediately for her phone. And she felt a cold and certain nausea move through her that had nothing to do with grief and everything to do with recognition. She was seeing, clearly and finally, who these people were when the performance was over and they believed the audience had gone home. She did not go into the sitting room. She went upstairs to her bedroom and closed the door and sat on the floor with her back against the bed and her knees pulled up to her chest and let herself fall apart in the privacy that the rest of them apparently did not need. Downstairs, the evening progressed in a way that would have been shocking to anyone watching who did not already know these people. Marcus poured himself a second glass of wine, then a third, and with each glass his voice grew a little louder and his restraint a little thinner. He talked about their father in the past tense with the ease of a man who had clearly rehearsed the transition in his mind. He talked about what the company needed, what changes should be made, which parts of the business should be sold and which should be restructured. He talked about it with the ownership of a man who believes the matter is already settled. Raymond listened and said little, making the occasional note in his notebook in a way that Marcus either did not notice or had long ago decided not to challenge. Vivian, on her third glass, got up and walked to the window and looked out at the city lights and said that Benjamin had built something remarkable and that it was now their responsibility to carry it forward. She said this with the solemnity of someone delivering a prepared statement. Marcus raised his glass. He said they were finally free. Free to make real decisions without having to wait for approval. Free to move at the speed the business actually needed. Free, he said, with a particular emphasis, from all of it. Vivian raised her glass. Raymond raised his. Serena raised hers with the automatic quality of someone joining a toast whose significance they have not fully considered. They drank. On the landing above them, in the shadows near the top of the staircase, Amara stood and watched them through the balusters the way she had watched things as a small child from this same spot, unseen and unheard and understanding far more than the adults below her thought she understood. She watched the glasses rise. She watched the wine catch the light. She watched her family celebrate the death of the man who had given them everything, and she pressed her hand flat against her own mouth to keep the sound inside her, and then she went back to her room and locked the door and lay face down on her bed with the lights off and wept into her pillow until there was nothing left. In the sitting room, the conversation continued into the late hours. Marcus spoke about the firstborn tradition in powerful families, about legacy and succession and why certain things had always been done in certain ways. Raymond listened with the neutral expression of a man filing information. He mentioned, casually, that he had noticed their father had been making changes to his financial arrangements in recent weeks. Account adjustments. Password changes. The kind of activity that suggested preparation for something. Marcus's mood shifted slightly at that. He asked what kind of preparation. Raymond said he did not know yet. He had tried to access certain accounts that morning and found them locked. He said it calmly, almost academically, the way a chess player discusses a move that has temporarily blocked their advance. Marcus said he was being paranoid. Raymond said perhaps. He said goodnight and went upstairs, and Marcus sat alone for a long time after that, his wine glass in his hand and his certainty somewhat less complete than it had been an hour earlier. At 3 in the morning, in a private room in the hospital on the other side of the city, Benjamin Adeyemi's fingers moved. Dr. Obi was beside him immediately. He leaned close and asked Benjamin to squeeze his hand if he could hear him. The squeeze came, weak at first and then stronger. The doctor spoke quietly, steadily, telling Benjamin not to rush, to let the medication clear his system, that he was safe and that Samuel was right there. Benjamin's eyes opened slowly. They found the doctor's face in the dimmed light and held it while clarity returned. When he spoke his voice was a whisper but it was completely coherent. He said, "I heard everything, Samuel." Dr. Obi said he knew. He said he was sorry. He said it again because the first time had not felt adequate and the second time did not either, but there was nothing else to say that would have been more true. Benjamin was quiet for a long moment. A single tear moved down the side of his face and disappeared into the pillow. He said Amara had been the only one who cried. The only one who held his hand. The only one whose grief had been real and unperformed and total. Dr. Obi confirmed it. He said it quietly and without embellishment because the truth did not require decoration. Benjamin closed his eyes again but not from weakness this time. He was thinking. When he opened them his expression had changed. The grief was still there, it would always be there now, it had made a permanent home in the space behind his eyes, but alongside it something harder had arrived. Something clear and decided and absolutely certain. He sat up slowly. His body was still weak from the medication but his mind was the sharpest it had been in years. He asked Dr. Obi what time the lawyer was coming in the morning. Dr. Obi said Mr. Coker had been informed and would arrive at 9. Good, Benjamin said. He lay back again and stared at the ceiling and said, very quietly, that tomorrow they were going to have a conversation that every person in that sitting room would remember for the rest of their lives. The morning came gray and cool. In the mansion each member of the family prepared in their own way for the day ahead. Vivian sat at her vanity table and applied her makeup with the careful precision of an artist working on a canvas. She practiced her expression. The slight furrow of the brow. The downward tilt of the mouth. The eyes adjusted to convey sorrow without looking, as she put it to herself while she worked, overdone. She examined the result from several angles. She decided it was appropriate. She was ready. Marcus paced his bedroom on the phone before 7 in the morning, giving instructions to people whose names he would not say aloud in case any of the house staff could hear through the door. He wanted financial records. He wanted to know exactly what had been moved, when, and where. He wanted the information before 10 o'clock. He hung up and checked his reflection in the mirror and straightened his suit jacket and told himself that today was the first day of everything he had been waiting for. Raymond had not slept. He sat at his desk in front of his laptop with his notebook open beside him and spent the early hours of the morning working methodically through every financial door he could find. Account after account returned the same result. Access denied. Insufficient funds. The numbers he found bore no relationship to the numbers he had been tracking for months. His calm expression held until the 5th account came back empty, and then it cracked, and he sat there in the early morning light staring at the screen with an expression that was very close to fear. Serena video called her closest friend and talked about the will reading while filing her nails. She talked about what she expected to receive and how she intended to spend it. She asked her friend what one should wear to a will reading. Her friend suggested something classic, something that photographed well. Serena agreed. She said there might be journalists. Significant families attracted coverage at moments like this. She wanted to look appropriate. And Amara sat on the floor of her bedroom surrounded by photograph albums, which she had taken down from the shelves in the early morning hours because she had needed to be with her father in the only way that was still available to her. She turned the pages and looked at his face through the years. Young and leaner in the early photographs, standing outside the first warehouse he had ever owned with a smile so wide and unguarded that it hurt her to look at it. Middle-aged and more contained but still with something alive in his eyes. Older and tireder and quieter but always, in every photograph she found of the two of them together, looking at her with an expression she now recognized as the particular love that a parent has for a child who reminds them of someone they have lost. He had seen her mother in her. She had known that. She had not always known how much it mattered to him. She closed the album and got up and put on a plain dark dress and went downstairs. The breakfast that Vivian had ordered arrived in the dining room like a buffet for a special occasion. Silver dishes of eggs and meats and fresh fruit and several types of bread. Juice and coffee and the good china. Amara stood in the doorway and looked at the table and then at the family seated around it, plates already loaded, conversation already resuming, and she felt the nausea return. She said she did not understand how they could eat. Margaret said it was practical. Serena said life went on. Marcus told Amara she should sit down and have something because the day ahead would require her to be functional. Amara looked at each of their faces. She said, quietly, that she had heard them last night. Heard the toast. Heard the plans. Heard every word that was spoken in the sitting room below her bedroom while her father's body lay in a hospital 3 kilometers away. The table went silent. No one offered an explanation that held any weight, and Amara did not wait for one. She turned and walked to her father's study, the room where he had always gone to think, and she closed the door behind her and stood under the large portrait of him that hung on the wall and looked up at it and spoke to him the way you speak to people when you no longer have any other way of reaching them. Mr. Coker arrived at 9:30. He was let in by the head of household staff, an elderly man named Joseph who had worked for the family for 31 years and whose eyes were red and whose voice, when he greeted the lawyer, was thick with a grief that required no preparation and no practice. Mr. Coker shook Joseph's hand and held it for a moment and said he was sorry. Joseph said Mr. Adeyemi had been a good man. He said it simply and absolutely, the way people state facts they have verified through long personal experience. The family assembled in the formal sitting room. They arranged their faces as they had arranged their clothes, for an appropriate occasion. Mr. Coker came in carrying his briefcase and sat at the head of the room and set his papers on the table before him. He looked around at each face in turn and noted the particular geography of the room, the way some chairs had been moved slightly closer together and Amara's chair was slightly apart from all the others, near the window, at the edge of things. He noted it and said nothing. He informed them that the will had been significantly revised 3 weeks before Mr. Adeyemi's death. Marcus and Raymond exchanged a glance that was too quick to be entirely controlled. Vivian asked what kind of revisions. Mr. Coker said they would hear everything shortly. He verified the identity of each person present, working methodically through the names, and then he broke the seal on the heavy envelope and removed the document and put on his glasses and began to read. He read Benjamin's preamble first. The part where Benjamin spoke directly to his family and told them that he had loved each of them, that the love had not always been returned or recognized or appreciated, but that it had been there, every day, underneath the work and the decisions and the long absences that the building of an empire required. He read the part where Benjamin said he had begun, in his final years, to wonder whether his family loved him or only what his name and money could provide. He read the words that made Marcus sit up straighter and Vivian's hands tighten in her lap. He read the sentence that said, "So I created a test." The room changed. The quality of the air changed. Every face in it changed in the specific way that faces change when a certain kind of fear arrives. Mr. Coker looked up from the papers. He said there was more and that he thought they would want to be very still for what came next. He looked back at the document and read the sentence that said, "If you are hearing this read aloud, it means my test is complete, it means I fake my death to see how you would respond, and it means..." The sitting room door opened. Benjamin Adeyemi walked in. He was wearing a plain white shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbow and dark trousers, and he walked with the particular steadiness of a man who has slept very little but has made a decision so complete that it has taken the place of rest. He looked, in that moment, more like the young man in the early photographs than he had in 20 years. Something had clarified in him overnight. Some arrangement of his features had settled into the truth of who he actually was underneath the wealth and the reputation and the long careful management of other people's expectations. He said, in a voice that was quiet but filled the room entirely, "It means I heard everything." Vivian's face went the color of unfinished concrete. Marcus stood up so quickly his chair fell backward with a crash that nobody moved to address. Raymond sat perfectly motionless, his notebook open in his lap, his pen held still above the page, his mouth slightly open. Serena made a sound that was not quite a word and pressed herself back in her chair. Amara looked at her father from across the room. She looked at him for one full second in which her mind processed what she was seeing and arrived at the only conclusion available. Then she was across the room. She crossed it the way you cross a room when something you believed you had lost is suddenly returned to you, without looking at anything except the destination, without caring about anything except arrival. She put her arms around him and held him as tightly as a person can hold another person, and she said his name in the voice of someone who has spent the night learning to live without a thing and has just been told they do not have to. Benjamin held her just as tightly. He pressed his hand against the back of her head and closed his eyes for a moment and let himself feel the full weight of what she meant, this child of his, this girl with Sarah's eyes who had held his hand in the ambulance when she believed he was beyond knowing it, who had talked to him in the darkness because love does not require an audience or a response or even a certainty that anyone is listening. Then he looked at the rest of his family over her shoulder. He looked at each of them in turn with the measured steadiness of a man who has decided what is true and what must follow from it. He told them to sit down. He said it once, quietly, and they sat. He played them the recordings. All of them. The hospital corridor, clear and unambiguous, Marcus's voice bright with relief and ambition. The sitting room at midnight, the glasses raised, the toast to freedom. Vivian at her vanity mirror, adjusting her grief like a costume. Raymond at his laptop at 5 in the morning, trying locked door after locked door in the financial architecture of his father's estate. He played them without commentary, letting the sound speak at their full volume, letting each person in the room hear their own voice and the voice of the person beside them and understand, without any assistance from him, what they were listening to. When it was over, the room was very quiet. Benjamin stood before them and said that he had built his life and his empire and his fortune from nothing. He said he had started without connections or capital or any particular advantage beyond the willingness to work without limit for as long as it took. He said he had done it believing, for most of his life, that he was doing it for his family. For the people in this room. He said that last night, lying in a hospital bed in the dark, he had been forced to understand that the family he had been building it for existed mainly in his own imagination, and that the people who actually lived in his house and bore his name had a relationship with his wealth that bore very little resemblance to a relationship with him. He turned to Vivian. He asked her directly, without preamble or softening, whether she had ever loved him. She held his gaze for a moment and then looked at the floor. She said she had respected him. She had admired what he built. She had been proud of the life they had together. But love, she said, quietly and without anger, love was something she had not been able to find in a man who came home from the office after midnight and was gone before she woke and talked about the business at every meal as though it were a member of the family with a seat at the table. She said this calmly. Benjamin listened without interrupting. Then he said he was sorry that he had not given her more of himself while there had still been time for it to matter. He said it without sarcasm and without cruelty. He meant it. He turned to Marcus. He said that Marcus had talked to him as though he were an institution rather than a father. He said that checking on a man's health every morning is not the same as caring about a man's health, and that a son who is counting the days until an inheritance arrives has confused waiting with loving. Marcus tried to speak. Benjamin said he would have his turn and it was not yet. He told Marcus that the company he had spent 50 years building would not be going to him. Not because he did not love him. He said he loved him. He said he would always love him. But love and trust are different things, and he was not able to give the work of his life into the hands of a man whose first call after his father's death had been to his business advisors. He turned to Raymond. He said very little to Raymond. He said that a man who steals quietly from his father while smiling at him across the dinner table every evening does not need a speech. He needs consequences. He said that Mr. Coker had the full documentation of the funds Raymond had been redirecting from company accounts over the past 2 years, and that the matter would be handled through the appropriate legal process if Raymond preferred. Or Raymond could accept the terms in the will, which were less than he deserved and more than he had earned, and they could agree that the matter was settled. Raymond looked at his notebook. He said he would accept the terms. He looked at Serena. He said that she was young enough to still become the person she had not yet decided to be. He said that beauty and attention were not the same as a life, and that a life required investment and effort and a willingness to care about something other than how things appeared. He said he hoped she would find that. He said he thought she was capable of it. Serena was crying. The tears were real this time. He could see the difference. Then he looked at Amara. He sat down beside her and took her hand and held it the way he had held her hand when she was very small and frightened of things he could not protect her from. He said her name. He said that she had answered the question that had kept him awake for 2 years. He said that love, the real kind, the kind that does not require an audience or a reward, had been present in his house all along, in one person, in her. He said that the entirety of his estate, the companies and properties and investments and everything he had ever built, was hers. Not to keep for herself. He knew she would not keep it for herself. But to steward, to use well, to grow in ways that went beyond balance sheets and shareholder returns. He said he believed she would do things with it that he had never thought to do. He believed she would make it mean something. The room erupted. Marcus shouted. Vivian stood up. Raymond said nothing, but his jaw was set and his eyes were very bright. Serena wept into her hands. Benjamin raised his voice once, the way a man raises his voice who does not raise it often but knows exactly what it sounds like when he does, and the room went quiet. He said that each of them had been left enough to live on comfortably. He said that comfort was more than he had started with, and that if they wanted more, the path was available to them. It was the same path he had taken. Work. Build. Earn it. Then he and Amara left the room together, and the family sat in the wreckage of the morning and what it had revealed about them, and Benjamin Adeyemi walked out of that room feeling, for the first time in longer than he could clearly remember, entirely free. In the months that followed, the mansion became a quieter place and, in its quietness, a warmer one. Vivian left and settled the terms of their separation with the practical efficiency that had always been her greatest strength. Marcus left furious and started 2 new ventures in quick succession, both of which struggled in ways that people who had watched him closely would not have been surprised by. Raymond accepted the legal terms and disappeared from the city, and nobody who knew him was surprised by that either. Serena did something that surprised everyone. She moved to a smaller apartment and got a real job, an actual job with responsibilities and hours and a salary that had nothing to do with her last name, and she began to use the audience she had spent years building for something other than photographs of herself. She called Amara every week. At first Amara answered with caution. After a while she answered with something that was beginning, slowly and carefully, to resemble warmth. Benjamin and Amara had breakfast together every morning in the small room off the kitchen, not the formal dining room with its table for 20 and its chandelier. They sat across from each other over coffee and talked about real things. The business, the world, ideas, books, the things that had happened and the things that might happen next. He was teaching her everything he knew, and she was learning it quickly, which did not surprise him, and adding her own thinking to it in ways that occasionally stopped him mid-sentence and made him look at her with an expression that was very close to awe. One morning she told him she wanted to start a foundation. She had been thinking about young people who had grown up without a parent, who had the ability and the will to build something of their own but not the resources to begin. She wanted to fund their education. She wanted to name it after her mother. Benjamin sat with that for a long moment. He looked at his daughter across the small table in the morning light and felt the particular fullness that comes to people who have gone looking for something they believed was lost and found, in the finding, that it was there all along in the one place they had not thought to look. He said, "Your mother would have loved everything about you." He reached across the table and held her hand. Outside the window the city was beginning its morning, ordinary and full and indifferent to any particular story within it. But inside that small room, at that small table, something had been recovered that no amount of money could have bought and no amount of loss could entirely take. A father and a daughter, sitting together in the truth of who they were to each other, with nothing performed and nothing pretended and nothing between them but the real thing. He had faked his death to find out who loved him. What he found was that love had been beside him all along, quiet and patient and entirely without conditions. He had simply needed to be still enough to hear it. If this story moved you tonight, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Like this video and subscribe to Bishop Tales for powerful, emotional, true-to-life stories every single week. Drop a comment and tell us where you are watching from, and tell us, who in your life would hold your hand in the dark. We want to know. See you in the next story, *.